Hey everyone, welcome to the most fashionable YouTube channel on the internet. I decided to wear my most expensive gear for this, my Mets hoodie and old Mets hat. As we get into Chapter 5, Beast from Water, from William Golding's Lord of the French Fries. This chapter starts off with everyone's favorite leader. That's a joke. Give a like to the channel if you got that joke. Pacing along the water's edge, given the incident from the night before, the issues around the fire and the growing division between the hunters, the little Inns, and Simon, Piggy, Ralph contingency, sort of quasi-leaders. Ralph decides he's going to hold this meeting and he's going to reestablish order, and he is going to lay down the law, and he's going to not let anyone talk until he, again, reestablishes a sense of law and order in the children on the island. So in the first paragraph, it's very interesting. He's walking along the beach and the ocean in the sort of wake of the crashing waves, the white foam, and he's sort of threading a path along the white foam of the waves between the ocean and the beach. If you could imagine, if this was being filmed, it's very symbolic that he's, on one side of him, he has the wildness and the unknown of the ocean, and perhaps somewhere out there, civilization and rescue. And on the other hand, he has the present situation, the chaos of the island, and the growing discord and difference he has with the hunters and Jack and the little Inns. So he is very conflicted at this point. So that's why he walks that line between both the water and the beach that is perfectly laid out for him by the foam. It says, he found himself understanding the wearisome of his life, where every path was an improvisation, and a considerable part of one's waking life was spent watching one's feet. Interesting, watching one's feet. So now, again, going back to the conflict that's been developing between him and Jack, watching his feet, that's telling about the situation that Ralph finds himself in, is that he has to watch his feet. He literally has to be careful where he steps, and where he goes, what he says, and what he does, because there's a bit of perhaps a mutiny, if you want to use the Romeo and Juliet term. There's talk of an uprising. He stopped facing the strip and remembering the first enthusiastic exploration as though it was part of a brighter childhood. So just like in the last video, we talked about how we have marked time. The kids, their hair is growing long. Golding describes also like how their clothes have deteriorated. Some of them have, at this point, they've decided not to wear clothes. In fact, Ralph talks about how he doesn't like having the long hair, and he doesn't like the dirty shirt that he has to wear, and he doesn't like the constant rubbing against his legs of the shorts he's forced to wear. He doesn't like sleeping in leaves. He's had it. He wants off the island. So this is in firm opposition to Jack, who in the last chapter has eschewed, meaning he's given up the fire in favor of the hunt. So on one hand, Jack has clearly opted for life on the island. He's inherited the chaos. He wants to be part of the chaos. We find out later in the chapter that he's been all over the island, even by himself and in the darkness. Whereas Ralph, his thoughts tend towards what could have been that smoke out on the horizon in the last chapter. And by the way, he's still really upset about that. And that's going to come up in the lecture he gives to the boys in a few moments. So he assembles the boys, and Golding has an interesting technique where he describes the literal setup of the meeting that Ralph calls. There are 3 logs set up like a triangle. On one log is situated Ralph and Simon and Piggy. Then you have on the other log, you have the hunters with Jack. And then on the third log, which becomes, unfortunately, a sort of comic relief in this section, you have the Littlins who sit on a log which isn't really grounded into the ground, and when they sit on it, oftentimes it has a tendency to roll backwards and fling children into the air, and the hunters think that's hilarious. Much again, Ralph's trying to establish order, and every couple of paragraphs you get this description of children being tossed backwards off a log because it's not secured into the ground. Also, what's interesting is as in terms of a passage of time, the log is described as being sort of polished, meaning like they've sat on these logs so much that that they're polished, that this has been going on a long time. Immediately, we get the sense that this meeting is different. This is a different meeting. Remember, in the past, Ralph expresses frustration at the meetings. Well, this meeting is different. First of all, it takes place later in the afternoon. Why is that important, Mr. Rance? Really, you're bothering us with this like three-word thing that Golding threw in there? Well, yes, I am going to bother you with this because I think it's important that the idea that Golding writes that this meeting is happening closer to nighttime. So if you think of the chapters as hands on a clock, that this novel, the actions of the novel are getting closer to darkness. That in the morning everything was okay and fresh and new and the kids were frolicking, and we've had this progression towards twilight where people are becoming more comfortable with the idea of night, that some people we are seeing, like Jack is very actively engaged with the darkness in the jungle and night. Simon also, we don't know yet about him, but Simon also seems to have embraced that, maybe not darkness, but definitely the jungle part of it. Piggy is, again, the logical, rational, reasonable one. He's still trying to figure it all out. And later in the chapter, we'll see more evidence of that. So anyway, so the meeting is different. It takes place later in the afternoon, which is symbolic of the sort of waning of time in the novel, that we're progressing towards twilight, perhaps. The mood is very solemn. Some of the kids know that Ralph is very heated about the fact that the fire is going out, and maybe are there waiting to see the perhaps fireworks between him and the hunters, him and Jack. So the others, the kids that don't know about the fire and don't know about the thing that happened between Piggy and Jack and Simon and the hunters, do recognize that something's different. They see that something's amiss, something's strange about this particular meeting. And they see right off the bat that Ralph is mad. Ralph is upset. So page 80, Ralph goes into a very long-winded speech. Ralph let out spare breath with little grasp that was echoed in his audience. And he outlines a plan by plan, step by step, very logical, rational, very Piggy-like explanation of how order is going to be restored. From things like, where you're supposed to go to the bathroom, right? Don't go to the bathroom near where you eat, Littlins, right? Sounds like, why would he have to say that? But the problem is, he has to say that because the kids are going to the bathroom, being lazy, where they eat. The idea of filling up water jars so people can have a drink. All these, the huts that need to be built. Because, they built the first two huts, and by the second hut, it was only Ralph and Piggy and Simon building them. So the second hut and the third hut aren't very strong. And the kids, after they built the first hut, have disbanded that process and don't care about it anymore. So we have to set to work building up another hut, and that's very logical, very rational. And then he gets to the part with the fire, and that's page 80. So while he says, Jack started to chip a piece of wood with his knife and whispered something to Robert, who looked away. So it's interesting that while Ralph brings up the fire, Jack is kind of glaring at him, and he's got like a stick, and he's sharpening the stick with a knife, while Ralph is talking about the fire. The fire is the most important thing on the island. How can we ever be rescued except by luck if we don't keep a fire going? Is a fire too much for us to make? He flung out an arm. Look at us. How many are we? And yet we can't keep a fire going to make smoke. Don't you understand? Can't you see? Ought we to die before that fire gets let out? So eventually the discussion shift to the fear that the little uns are having. This is another motif, which is a repetition, right? A repetition of ideas, repetition of symbols, repetition of images. And here we have this repetition of the concept of fear. There is this sort of snake thing that is out in the woods that no one's technically seen, but everyone is afraid of. That's important. Golding is tossing this idea in there of, what happens when you have collective fear in a community, when we are all afraid of various things. What do we tend to do with that fear? Well, it makes it more comfortable for us if we can take that unnamed fear, that deep down in your heart fear. You don't know why you're afraid. You don't know why you're scared. It's just fear. It's just there. It just worms its way into your heart. And you don't know why, again, you don't know why it's there, but you do know that it's definitely there. And it's definitely having a negative impact on you. A very human thing, remember going back to our first video, a remarkably human thing, an extraordinarily human thing to do with fear, unnamed fear, is to give it a name. Give it a shape. Give it a form. Make it an object. Make it something that we can target. So this is what Ralph wants to talk about on page 82. As we discussed the fear, Jack takes the conch shell away, because if there's anything on the island that is unnamed or unseen but still scary, Jack is going to have something to say about it. Why? Because Jack's been all over the island. If there's anything to fear on the island, Jack's going to find it and put a spear through it. Jack stood up and took the conch. So this is a meeting to find out what's what. I'll tell you what's what. You little and started all this with that fear talk. Beasts. Where from? Of course you were frightened. Sometimes, but we put up with being frightened. Only Ralph says you scream at night. What does that mean? But nightmares. Anyway, you don't hunt or build or help. You're a bunch of crybabies and sissies. What's that? And as for the fear, you'll have to put up with that like the rest of us. So this is page 82. Jack is sort of seeing this as, he doesn't want to hear about it from these crybaby kids. That, unless you want to come out and help me, I don't have time to deal with your petty fears, your baby games. Page 83, he's trying to reaffirm the respect of the children. He's only been speaking for about 3/4 of a page now. Very interesting, because structurally, Ralph spoke for, a solid 2 pages. And all Jack needs to do is speak for a couple of lines. And he ends with, "Am I a hunter or not?" They nodded simply. He was a hunter, all right. No one doubted that. Well then, I've been all over this island, by myself. If there were beasts, I'd have seen it. Be frightened because you're like that, but there is no beast in this forest. Jack handed back the conch and sat down. It's like a mic drop. The whole assembly applauded with him with relief. Then Piggy held out his hand. And then we get on page 84, after this very, serious series of arguments from Ralph and then Jack and then Piggy on page 84. They make fun of Piggy for talking about the fear that he has in his belly. If you get a pain in your stomach, whether it's a little one or a big one, and then someone yells out, "Yours is a big one," because he's got a pain in his belly. When you're done laughing, perhaps we can get on with the meeting. And if the little ones climb back on that twister again, only to fall off in a second, so they might as well sit on the ground and listen. No, you have doctors for everything, even on the inside of your mind. That's a really profound thought that Piggy just said. You have doctors even on the inside of your mind. Maybe we can have a big discussion about this in class, but he's talking perhaps about defense mechanisms, which is, a way to look at the brain and dreams and your thoughts and how you cognitively, how thinking works. How do your thoughts take care of fears? When you're afraid of something, what does your brain literally do with those fears? And they're called defense mechanisms. So one's called repression. So repression is like, when you have a fear of something, we can take that fear and kind of bury it under the rug and then stack more layers of rug over it. And that's called repression. Or we can displace it. We can, replace it with something else and blame that other thing. So that's like when you're mad at something that, you're stressed out about something and you take it out on somebody else. So you've taken that fear and you've displaced it, you've moved it to a different source, and you're taking out your fear on the first thing on the second thing. And this is kind of what the kids on the island have done. They've taken their fear of being alone and being separated from the adults, and their fear of survival, and their fear of nature, and their fear of the dark, and their fear of everything. Because they're little kids, you got to remember that. And they've created this boogeyman monster. They've displaced their fear and given it a shape and a form, and it lives in the woods, and it's scary. And it's easier to have a named fear. It's easier to have a shape of a fear to be scared of than it is to be aware of unnamed fears that you have in your own heart. So again, I keep going back to this idea. This is a remarkably human thing that Golding's writing about. The nature of fear itself. So at the end of the chapter, or the end of the section there, Piggy paused. Unless, Ralph moved restlessly. Unless what? Unless, so again, that unnamed fear, there's no such thing to be afraid of. And then Piggy sort of says, unless we get frightened of people. All right, that's kind of a heavy thought that Piggy's dropping on us right now, because, we've already had this tension between, we have this obvious tension between Ralph and Jack, and sort of this secondary and tertiary, meaning second and third levels of stress between Jack and Piggy, and Simon now, by giving Piggy the meat that Jack didn't want to give him, that's another layer of tension and anxiety. So this is an interesting thing for Piggy to say. So what follows is a sequence of little ins talking. Poor Percival, the smallest, who they make talk, and they put him in the middle of that triangle, remember, of logs, and where inside the triangle the grass has grown out and it's scary in there, and he's the smallest of the little ins, and they force him to talk about a fear that he's had, and the conversation breaks down, and on page 88, Jack cleared his throat, then reported casually. One of the kids says, he says the beast comes out of the sea. Oh my gosh. There's the title of the chapter. There's another, if Jack's been around the island and hasn't seen the beast in any of the trees, or, in his pursuit of pigs, where is it coming from? If Jack hasn't seen it, where's this thing coming from the kids are seeing? And the little one says, well, what if it's coming out of the sea? And then they go on this back and forth about, Daddy said they haven't found all the animals in the sea yet. So it's these kids trying to, the meeting, to break this down simply, the meeting is exactly how you would think an important meeting of children would go. They're talking about literally where you should be pooping and peeing, talking about being afraid of the dark. There's some issues over who's in charge at this point. So, and the humor of the kids who keep falling off the log over and over again, and the hunters are laughing at them. Okay, moving over to 89. I'm sorry, on 89 is another example of the kids falling. Page 91 is where I wanted to get to. Jack, you haven't got the conch to speak. Let him speak. Jack's face swam near him. So this is another conflict between Jack and Ralph. Ralph is saying, you can't speak. You don't have the conch shell. And Jack says, and you shut up. Who are you anyway? Sitting there telling people what to do. You can't hunt. You can't sing. I'm chief. I was chosen. Why should choosing make any difference? Just giving orders that don't make any sense. Piggy's got the conch. That's right. Favor Piggy, as you always do. Jack's voice sounded a bit mimicry. Jack, the rules, shouted Ralph. You're breaking the rules. Who cares? Ralph summoned his wits. Because the rules are the only thing we've got. Remember, what was the point of this whole meeting? Ralph wanted to reestablish the rules. And what is Jack doing from him? He's saying that the rules don't matter, that voting doesn't matter, the conch doesn't matter. The only thing that matters are your skills in the jungle, like me and the hunters. Because the rules are the only thing we've got. But Jack was shouting against him. Bollocks to the rules means, I have no care about the rules at this point. We're strong. We hunt. If there's a beast, we'll hunt it down. We'll close it in and beat and beat and beat. He gave a wild whoop and leapt down to the pale sand. At once the platform was full of noise and excitement, scrambling, screams, and laughter. The assembly shredded away and became discursive and random, scattered from the palms to the water and away from the beach beyond night sight. Ralph found his cheek touching the conch and took it from Piggy. And lo and behold, what's happened in this chapter, in terms of the time frame, this meeting has gone on so long that it is now dark out again. Notice how many times that happens, that the chapter begins in light and ends in darkness. How many times have I told you about characters that blend light and darkness, characters that enter and exit the woods, characters that are defined by light and shadow, the rising and falling of the sea. This is another important piece here. And what's even more significant here is that the meeting has broken up. And a very, very, very important thing is about to happen. And we'll see, the repercussions for Ralph and for Jack and for Piggy. So as the meeting's breaking up and the kids are sort of screaming and chanting and the hunters are doing their own thing and they're marching off with Jack and the Little-Ins are doing crazy Little-In things, Piggy is, kind of, I don't want to say obnoxiously, but he's pestering Ralph. Blow the conch shell again. Blow it again. Reassemble. And Ralph, sort of this politician here, realizes that if I do that, in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this disorder, and in the midst of the revelry that the kids are having, and the screaming, and the shouting, and the chanting, and the incantations, and if I blow the conch shell, which is supposed to summon everyone back to me, what if I, at this point, do that, and they don't come back? Okay, what would happen if I do what you say, and it doesn't work? And Ralph probably correctly realizes that it probably wouldn't work. That the chaos, remember why? What time of day is it? It's dark out. Ralph realizes, and again, the chapter starts in the daytime, ends in the nighttime. Ralph realizes that they're lost, at least for right now. If I blow the conch and they don't come back, then we've had it. We shan't keep the fire going. We'll be like animals. We'll never be rescued. The chapter ends kind of, again, in a very creepy way. The hunters go off in there, wherever they're going, doing it at night. The Little-Ins are wherever they're going, pooping everywhere on the island. And Ralph, Simon, and Piggy go back to their respective area. And the last chapter here. A thin wail out of the darkness chilled them and set them grabbing for each other. Then the wail rose, remote and unearthly, and turned into an inarticulate gibbering. Percival Wemmings Madison of the Vicarage, Harcourt Street, Anthony, lying in the long grass, was living through circumstances in which the incantation of his address was powerless to help him. Remember that Percival was the one that was summoned from the Little-Ins to speak in the middle of the logs and the tall grass, and we sort of forgot about him, and everyone left the meeting after and left this poor littlest of the Little-Ins in the middle of the tall grass, and something has possessed him, and he's screaming, he's wailing, he's screeching, he's letting out this mad howl, and it unnerves everybody. Everybody who hears it shudders to hear the wailing of this littlest of the Little-Ins. All right, so that's it for chapter 5. That's your sort of discussion and analysis. We go back to this, again, dichotomy, which means dichotomy is when you compare two things like light and dark, and what happens in the light versus what happens in the dark, how the order and structure of power is breaking down, how roles might be changing, and what characters might be doing in response to the changing roles. Now, I, for one, think that the unnamed monster is clearly, clearly